In the sewers, several people in protective suits were filtering the sewage for the presence of mana residues. While working, one of the guys decided that nothing would be found for today, until his gaze fell on a sparkling stone high up in the wall. Thinking that a crystal of this size would allow him to pass the daily standard, a guy in a white suit began to wade through the water straight to him. It was difficult to reach the goal, but the employee decided to take a chance. As expected, he failed. With a splash in all directions, he fell into the water. His partner immediately rushed to his aid, worrying and asking if he was okay. To this, the hero of the occasion replied that everything was fine. And gradually he began to rise, holding his hand at the place of impact. A worried colleague took off the protective mask behind which a pretty girl with blonde hair was hiding Yumin. The girl was a college employee. Adjusting her glasses, she again turned to the guy with the question, "Why is he so? After all, it's not worth it." But the guy who was still hiding his face didn't say anything. He just thought that there was no future in his life. Then other workers joined in, assuring him that there was no way to get there. It is dangerous to splash in this water, because it is infected with mana crystal moss. For ordinary people like them, this is a deadly poison, one careless movement, and you can die. After removing the protective mask, the dark-haired man just awkwardly grinned at them and scratching his head, agreed. It was Kang Hyunmu. After finishing the job, the guy swore at the top of his voice in the locker room. He was not happy with the salary that was given for the work done for today. It was only $30. How should he live on it? There is no justice in this world, no chance for a better life. Things could have been very different when 30 years ago, dungeons began to appear all over the world. In them, people awakened superpowers in themselves and the world smoothly entered a new era. However, not everyone has a chance to develop superpowers. The user started with 0 stars. This was the assessment given by the Henma system. Suddenly someone called out to the guy, interrupting his thoughts, thereby forcing him to turn around. It was a local lawyer, Robert Lee. The old man approached him and offered his sincere condolences to him, saying that he wanted to hand over the inheritance from his father. But he did not understand anything, he just said that he had no parents. Kang Hyunmu's life is like this. Lee stretched out his hand from which the pendant hung and gave it to the youngster, who could not refuse. Already in the manoprocessing working quarter of Weizong, the dark-haired man told about his gift to a colleague. He thought it was some kind of trinket until the girl exclaimed that it was a stone of return. And she told me more about him. This is an artifact that hunters used to return from the dungeons. Henma didn't understand why he would need it. And I asked the blonde about it while she was carefully examining the jewelry. She didn't know herself, because he didn't need to go to the dungeons. The guy was a little hurt by this, but Yumin quickly realized this and apologized. She did not want to offend him. He said that he understands everything and is not offended at all. To change the subject, the girl asked if he had heard of Li Jite, to which he replied that he was not interested. Just at that moment, the bus Hen needed arrived, on which he went home. Already at home, there was some kind of TV program on the old TV, in which it was announced that today the Tae-sun clan was leading Li Jite into battle. The raid on the Danjin Tabak, which has 5 stars, was crowned with success. It was the 3rd successful raid of a 5-star dungeon in the world, which was true. The leader of that expedition, Li Jite, commented on the reason for this success in such a way that he owes this victory to all members of the expedition. The dark-haired guy was sitting in front of this TV almost not listening to what was being said there. He was examining the object in his hand, which the lawyer had previously given him. And so, still carefully looking at the mysterious pendant, the same Li Jite was shown on TV. A cute guy with white hair told how proud he was that with this raid they showed the whole world the power of Korea. Of course, everyone will want to be in his place, because he is incredibly rich and strong, and also popular and beautiful. While Henmu only got this useless pebble. Such thoughts visited his head, and he just wants to escape from poverty. If he had at least one chance, he would have taken full advantage of it. Clutching the stone tightly in his hand, he solemnly decided that he would do anything for the sake of wealth. His hand lit up, or rather what was in it. This scared the youngster, forcing him to pull away with an exclamation, but not to let go of the object, which glows brighter and brighter. And suddenly a sign appears with the inscription "Welcome." The guy appears in an incomprehensible place for him, starting to look around quickly. It looks like an empty abandoned city with broken windows in its houses. Only the moon stands out, which shines brightly with a red and bloody light. His first impressions are that what a terrible place. A sign suddenly pops up in front of him and starts telling him to overcome himself. His body gained a source of mana and circulation began. Henme didn't understand what was going on and from where did he have mana. And the table kept saying that he had achieved the impossible. Having the lowest of the levels, he entered the location of the Hell level. I also got the SSS level luck effect, which will increase compensating for the difference between his level and the location level. Henmu has been in the Hell level location for a few minutes and has already received the title of the strongest in Hell. The guy in complete ignorance is asking questions, the answers to which he will not get. Just that he's the only survivor. The dark-haired man starts screaming in confusion, looking for is there anyone alive? But he notices the crystal moss that is already familiar to him. Remembering that little piece of crystal that I tried to get in the sewer. It would cost a couple of $100, how much will they give for this? A couple of thousand or a couple of tens of thousands, for sure. That was all Henmu was thinking about, looking at the crystal with delight. And he decided to snatch one, considering how lucky he was. Until a sudden sharp pain pierced him from the back. Blood spills from his mouth, and he drops the crystal. The condition of his body has received poisoning and paralysis, so it becomes hard for him to breathe sharply. The guy clutches his chest and falls to the ground in agony, writhing in pain. The sign warns as if nothing had happened that he was attacked, but it's too late. A scream escapes from his mouth, followed by foam. Who attacked him if there is no one around? Henmu was confused and scared, but there was nothing he could do but die. He was killed and the killer is poisonous dust they told him last. Is this the end, or is it just a bad dream? The guy opens his brown eyes and notices that he is still alive, but how? The first thing he thinks is that it's a dream, until he gets up on his knees and sees the same table in front of him. It says that the task has begun, and its goal is to survive until dawn. The dark-haired man gets up in horror and starts running from wherever his eyes look. All sweaty from nerves, he quickly runs without stopping and throws his jacket over himself. He didn't know who set it up, but he was ready to take revenge on them for it. Another blow and the guy is lying dead again, having lived only 5 minutes and 22 seconds from the last death. And so it was repeated 8 more times over and over again, and all he decided to do was beg for forgiveness. Kneeling, he bent down and began to turn to God, but this plan, as expected, did not work. Death overtook him again, but this time a little later, he managed to live 11 minutes and 13 seconds, almost twice since the last time. After 11 deaths, the dark-haired man came up with the idea to strengthen his resistance to toxic substances, which he did. But not everything is so simple. He was subsequently killed, even if he managed to extend his lifespan for a few more minutes. Already 14 deaths later, the guy realized that he managed to survive longer just by inhaling this dirty air, so he decided to continue doing this, increasing resistance to toxic substances. Sitting in the lotus position, Henmu inhaled and exhaled this air, remembering breathing exercises. It reminded him of how some man in a suit taught him to inhale deeply and deeper than usual and exhale also deeper than below the lungs. And little Henmu listened to him and did as he ordered, while he praised him for what the dark-haired one was doing well. Of all the children the man worked with, Henmu gave at least some hope. And these exercises were worth it, because thanks to them the guy got a new level and finally exhaled with relief. But he was killed anyway, but with what result? He managed to live for almost 2 hours, or rather an hour and 41 minutes and 21 seconds. After 28 deaths, the guy already felt so light that it seemed strange to him. He wondered what was wrong with his level, and it turned out that the concentration of poison in his blood was exceeded. He received a rare skill thanks to which the departure effect no longer causes damage to him. The dark-haired man did not understand how it happened, because he was just breathing poisonous dust, but he was glad of such an announcement, although he did not believe it. Deciding to go for a walk around the neighborhood, the guy set off. Everything was in ruins and crystal moss grew everywhere. Henmu picked up one of these and, thinking about selling them all, if only they were real, considered it. Until the table with the question whether he wants to collect crystal moss appeared. To which the guy agrees out loud and the moss disappears, which initially scared the dark-haired man. He had an inventory that he didn't even know about and enthusiastically began to study the table, deciding that he could do a lot of things. Until his joy was interrupted by a strange sound in the air. Turning around, the guy looked in the direction of the approaching sound and was horrified. With all his legs, he rushed to run away from the attacking mosquitoes with screams, but they did not lag behind the victim, continuing to follow. The small predator surrounded its target without letting it do anything. His achievement of the strongest in hell brought him an increase in abilities, but this will not help him in any way from the mosquitoes of the third level. They attacked in a swarm from all sides, flying into the mouth of a frightened and defenseless guy who could not help but scream. The attackers clung to him everywhere and began to suck his blood and for some reason began to explode, tearing the poor man's body apart, thereby killing him. The life expectancy this time was 6 hours, 18 minutes and 1 second, which is already quite a lot. Having died this time, the guy got a new level. Opening his eyes, the first thing Henmu saw was that he had received an average achievement due to the fact that he had killed more than 100 monsters at the same time, and his level of the effect of poisonous blood was increased. Still lying in a ruined building, the guy was trying to figure out how it was. Did the mosquitoes go with his blood? But there was an alarming warning causing him to jump. He was infected with an infection because of which his health will decrease by a small percentage every minute. Henmu was annoyed. What the fuck, he just woke up, so what the fuck? And having lost his balance, he fell hitting a chair with his hand, thereby breaking his leg and getting a new disassembly skill. The infection began to affect the cells of his body, and therefore his health dropped by 10%. To recover, the effect of the last giver was activated and the regeneration process began. After some time, while the regeneration was going on, the guy stuck with a tortured face. He was already sick of all these notifications. Only now he noticed his new skill, but did not notice when exactly he received it. Although there is nothing supernatural about it, it helps and it looks like he got it by breaking a chair leg, at least that's what he thought. After thinking it all over, he looked into the broken window on which the mosquito was sitting, and all that the dark-haired man was thinking at that moment was that there were even mosquitoes the size of a fist. Fuck this world, although the truth is there are more possibilities, so there are advantages. Remembering about his new disassembly skill, Henmu decided to try it and disassemble the chair. Taking it in his hands, the chair itself collapsed and disassembled into parts from the back to the legs, and the guy just watched with delight. This gave him ideas, because if he got a skill by breaking a chair, then maybe if he creates something, he will also get a skill? And he decided to try. Having assembled an ordinary stick from the legs of a disassembled chair, he managed to get a new assembly skill. The dark-haired man jumped up with joy and shouted, "What happened?" He has already received as many as 2 skills, although he thought he would do it later, but perhaps decided to start now. Gathering his courage, Henmu rolled up the sleeves of his jacket and solemnly decided that he would make a shelter for himself. He didn't know how much longer he would have to stay in this ruined world, and what enemies he would face. He would have to make a shelter for himself anyway, and then maybe he could survive longer. To begin with, he decided to use all his crystal moss and began to take it out of the inventory, wondering how much mana was in it. But at some point he came across a newspaper lying next to his leg, and picking it up, the guy began to read what it says. But the language in which the newspaper was written was not very clear to the dark-haired man, and he received a new foreign language skill. What does not count skills, the guy thought, and ordered to hide, waving to her. And he continued trying to read what was written there about the double-star Jite Li. Henmu immediately thought of Li Jite, who is from the Tae-Sun Guild, and thoughtfully stuck in the newspaper, thinking that it looks like he is on the same planet, but it is not clear at what time. Turning towards the window, he decided that maybe this is the future of our planet? And the guy sighed and scratched his head and realized that even if this was the case, he couldn't do anything about it anyway and put the newspaper away. But he can do something else right now, and sitting on the cards next to a bunch of infernal mosquitoes ordered to disassemble. Having received the sting of wings and the blood of infernal mosquitoes, the dark-haired man lay down with shortness of breath to rest. A lot of ingredients turned out, but what to do with them, Henmu did not know, and stood up, picked up one of the items and said the words to create. All the objects connected to form a hellish dart that the guy immediately began to consider. It is not known how effective he is and how he managed to make a rare weapon the first time, but the dark-haired man with a grin on his face decided to test it. He spent some time creating darts from all the available ingredients, at the same time flexing his arm and his shoulders. One of the items remained, and as with the previous ones, He stretched out his hand with the words create, but this time he created an egg secret of the legendary level. At this moment, notifications from the table with congratulations that he had received the achievement of creating the first legendary item and thereby increased his ability to create. The egg was almost the size of a fist, which amazed Henma, who admired his creation. The table began to tell the guy that it takes care of him so that it hatches and the chance that the embryo will be alive is 50%. He will be able to revive an item only if he meets certain criteria, or you can spend your rewards on reviving it. After thinking about it, the guy hid the egg under his jacket and was overwhelmed by reality from embarrassment. But suddenly a rumble was heard from behind, which scared the dark-haired man. Turning around, he looked from behind the wall at what kind of sound was there, and saw a goblin in the window who was holding a weapon in his hand looking around. Green noticed Henma when he stuck it in him in shock because he didn't know that there were goblins here. Baring his fangs, the goblin jumped down from the window, resolutely heading towards the guy who had not yet realized. When the evil spirits were very close and ready to strike, the guy automatically bounces off. Noticing the stairs, he understands that there is no other way and he needs to climb. Taking his legs in his hands, the dark-haired man rushed up the stairs while the goblin passed him over, waving his sword. Rising higher, Henma called for inventory to get weapons for battle. Taking out a stick, he turned around in the direction where the goblin should have been, but he wasn't there. The green one turned out to be smarter and came in from the back landing hard, letting the guy know that he was there. Torbjorn Red Helmet was the name of the goblin, and he had the 20th level, which means that he can easily defeat the guy. The creature wasted no time and jerked at the guy, waving his sword right in front of Henma's face, but he was able to dodge by jumping back. Then he struck another blow and then another, but the dark-haired man was able to evade everyone. But because of the last attack, the guy lost his stick, substituting it to reflect the enemy's sword. After that, the goblin said something in a language unknown to Henma, who was extremely surprised that he spoke. And Green did not stop and continued to attack. Swinging his sword this time, he managed to hit the guy, leaving a large wound on his chest. After that, the dark-haired man did not give up and took out hell darts from his inventory and threw them towards the enemy with the words that he should eat them. The goblin did not flinch for a second and calmly reflected them with a smirk on his face, cutting them in half without worrying about anything. Henma just stood there and tried to regain his breath, holding on to the wound site, breathing anxiously. Despite Torbjorn's skills, however, one dart hit him in the hand and the poison gradually began to penetrate into the blood of the green through the hand, forming ulcers in this place. But it didn't bother him at all, and he easily cut off his arm with a dart. Henma told him, even though he didn't know if he understood him, that he was a moron for some reason, cut off his hand and realized that his blood could be poisoned on darts. The wound inflicted earlier by the goblin suddenly opened and blood gushed out of it. This forced him to distract from the enemy for a second, which allowed him to hide and repeat the trick from behind. The dark-haired man already realized that he was finished when he saw him from above. Jumping over the guy with a somersault, the goblin's sword struck a crushing blow, and Henma passed out, fell to the floor. Green triumphantly stepped on the guy with one foot to show his coolness and turned around and began to leave, speaking in human, that it turns out they had not killed all the people yet. But he didn't know that the one he thought was dead was still alive and watching him leave. When the goblin left, the guy's regeneration mode was activated with the help of the last survivor's perk, as his stamina level dropped below 10%. Henma tried to get up, but the wound had not healed yet, so he failed and fell on his back, simultaneously calling the goblins, saying that he would take revenge on them. The table that formed the guy was highlighted by the fact that the task was completed, because of which he could finally exhale with relief. Since he had succeeded, he was able to survive the first night in hell. For the work done, he received 1 silver chest, but a compensation bonus was activated for the difference between his level and the level of the task, so instead of 1 silver chest, he received 1 gold. Also, now he can use the return stone before the start of the next task, which will begin in 2 weeks. The dark-haired man decided to take advantage of this opportunity, and reached for the pendant hanging around his neck and took it out, and squeezed it in his fist, wanting to return as soon as possible. The decoration lit up, and when the light disappeared, the guy opened his eyes. All dirty and exhausted, he found himself lying in a puddle on a residential street next to houses while the rain was dripping on him. Rising up, he looked around and immediately realized where he was, yelling with joy that he was back. Clenching his lips, he tore the pendant from his neck and was already about to hit her on the ground, scolding his father for what he was thinking about leaving him this. But he was stopped by the memories of those painful days, and not only when he found crystal moss or when he received his first disassembly skill or his first legendary item egg secret, which he never discovered. Angry that he couldn't break it, the dark-haired man took it in his fist and began to squeeze. Apparently hearing his squeals of joy, some girl came out of the house nearby. Noticing him all in ragged clothes through the fence, the girl who turned out to be his blonde colleague Yu Ming opened the gate and started calling his name, which alarmed the dark-haired man. Running up to the guy, the girl in the jacket began to anxiously ask why he was getting wet in the rain here, because it was mana rain and he could go. Taking off her jacket, the bespectacled woman threw it on Henma and called him to her room as soon as possible. The puzzled guy had no choice but to listen to her and follow her into the house. Being in the house, wrapped up in a jacket, he greeted his savior a little excitedly, who at that moment was taking out a decontaminator against mana precipitation. Taking it in her hands, she began to pester the dark-haired man to cleanse him of mana, although he said that he was not poisoned. But the blonde did not give up so easily and began to maliciously shout at the poor guy that it was as if he himself did not work as a collector of crystal moss waste, and did not know how dangerous he was and when the departure would be too late to regret. After listening to her screams, Henma still agreed to go wash up and went to the shower. When he finished, he left the bathroom with one towel on his hips while wiping his hair with the other. The dark-haired man thanked the girl for the shower and asked her what day it was. To which she replied over her shoulder that today was the 11th of September. The guy was shocked and asked if it was true that the 11th. The girl just looked at the half-naked man questioningly, and asked if anything had happened. It was impossible to reach him for 2 days, and she had to work alone. Henma didn't answer anything, flying in his thoughts, putting his finger under his chin thoughtfully about the fact that only 2 days had passed, although it felt like he had been there for several years. Yu Ming only looked at the guy in front of her, moving from head to torso looking at his abs as he continued to think about his own. That place seems to be a working quarter. Why did he end up there? Because he was at home before teleportation. He would have hesitated for a long time, but the girl, clearing her throat, still decided to pull herself together and look away from the body of her colleague, and he realized immediately covered himself with a towel, arriving slightly in shock. After thinking about it, the blonde decided that he needed clothes and wanted to go to the store to buy them for him. Of course there were his past clothes, but they were all infected and also torn. Therefore, she ordered the dark-haired man not to put it on and hiding behind the wall for the last time said that she would be back soon and he would not leave here. After checking that the blonde left, Henmu calmly called the inventory, studying what he has there. Noticing the golden chest that he received as a reward for the task, the guy clicked on it and a table appeared that announced that he had received a luck perk of SSS rank that would positively affect the quality of his awards. Several gold and silver-colored cards were highlighted, which gradually began to burn down, leaving one legendary with the skill of help in battle. The dark-haired man was extremely surprised because it is difficult to get any skill, and it is almost impossible to get a legendary one. It seems that only 7 hunters around the world have a legendary skill. Does this really mean that he is the 8th? And he began to consider his new skill of help in battle and hope that this help was for him, since there was no description. Clenching his palm into a fist, he confidently directed him forward, and at the same moment Yu Min returned with new clothes in her hands. Who was impressed by what she saw, not understanding what he was doing, she asked the half-naked guy with a towel over his neck. But then I decided to just pretend that I didn't see it, which Henma was glad about. A few minutes later, while the guy was getting dressed, sitting down at the table, the blonde began to explain that in a good way she should have taken him to the hospital, but he seemed to her unharmed. That's why she decided to bring him to her home. But she didn't understand something, because only those who have superpowers don't need to worry about mana poisoning, and she didn't have them with him. Because of this, I decided to ask if he has them, and if so, then why does he work as a collector? To which he replied that he actually only recently acquired these abilities, and this answer made the girl think. But Henmu changed the subject, remembering that Yu Min was talking about some kind of research in which she also takes part. Bespectacled agreed and said that this is a study of crystal moss. The guy was delighted with an excellent opportunity, and asked for help by stretching his hand forward while the girl was interested in what the request was. Henmu's hand lit up with a purple light, and he said that he had messed up something, but he did not know how much money he could ask for it. The blonde was fucked up when she saw crystal moss weighing 1 kilogram in his hand in the place of the other world, and the guy continued as if nothing had happened that since she was researching crystal moss, then she'd better know how much this piece costs. The girl, from what she saw, already screamed so that it could be heard even on the street, because it can't be. She was so amazed by the crystal moss that she couldn't stop rejoicing, and she decided to ask where he found it. To which he waved off, answering the question with a question whether it is important at all. Of course it was important, because it is not so easy to find crystal moss of such purity. It deserves not only 4 stars, but even 5. And Henmu only turned the topic to Yu Min, who said that she was collecting samples for research, which she confirmed. But first he did not say that he would give it to her, he showed it to her only then that he needed her help. The blonde looks angrily at the guy, saying that he should continue to say that he exactly needs help. The dark-haired man brought his face close to the girl's face, and said that she would help him legally sell this sample. But there was a problem that made the girl doubt that she would be able to fulfill the request, because a sample of such volume and purity would require the registration of a whole bunch of documents. Only if it was smaller, it would be easier to sell. What the guy took as the fact that it was a matter of volume, and even without blinking an eye, he easily broke the crystal in half, showing the girl. For which she was ready to tear the guy apart, and shouting at him, she began to pound on his back until the dark-haired man said that he had more and even more. Because of what the blonde already burst into tears, wondering if it was true that he had more, and he continued to eat and asked if she could now sell that broken crystal moss. The girl, wiping her tears under her glasses, only agreed, and the guy began to set conditions for her, showing with his fingers that there were 2 of them. The first condition was that she did not tell anyone how this crystal moss got to her, and the second was that she did not tell anyone that she was selling it for him. The blonde still did not have time to agree, saying that at least it's better than seeing him break such a sample, because for her it's so terrible to see. Henmu didn't understand if it was really so terrible, and she started screaming again that he didn't know anything about crystals. Crystal moss of such purity can be mined only in the very first dungeon in history, and these samples that the guy brought are unique and priceless, and their value is greater than the money they are worth. And thrusting the dark-haired man right under his nose sheets of paper with the image of these samples with a description, continues that he just takes such a priceless sample and breaks it right in front of her eyes. For which the guy apologizes, thinking that they are all the same anyway. And going to leave for the last time, he repeats that she should sell this sample, and then, depending on how much they will give for it, he will think about what to do next with the rest. Yu Ming, noticing that he is already going to take a bag with his last infected clothes and leave, offers to go to him tomorrow for clothes and that he can spend the night with her. The guy turns around in shock, not understanding whether she is joking or not, but agrees and stays. The night passed quietly, and in the morning the girl was going to meet with the buyer, leaving the guy alone in bed and waving goodbye left, after which the dark-haired man began to think that she scares him, though not always, but sometimes there are moments. A week later, Henma decided this time to go with Yu Min to sell the crystal, but she did not understand why, and the guy only replied that just in case, you never know what would happen. Although the girl still insisted that this is not such a dangerous business as it seems to him, and nothing like this will happen. Although he asked for it himself, but he knows that many crystal merchants are desperate people outside the law who have nothing to lose, and even though they will offer a very high price for a person to bring them all their supplies, and then who knows what they will start. Henma had a bad feeling. Thinking about it, the guy went in the wrong direction at all, but it's good that the girl noticed it and pulled him up to her, saying where she needed to go. When he reached the meeting place, there were 2 types sitting at neighboring tables. Henma thought that the one who was fatter and there was a buyer and got a little worried, but the girl took him to another person. Approaching the right table, Yu Min politely greeted the stranger, introducing him to Henma as a business partner. The old man extended his hand in greeting and called his name Park Wiso, to which the guy repeated and shook hands in response. Releasing his hand, it seemed to the dark-haired man that, surprisingly, the old man's grip was quite strong and he was not sure at all that he could defeat him if he attacked. Because of this, a table was displayed activating the perk of the strongest in hell, which gave a compensation bonus for the difference between his level and the level of the task. But the guy was not going to fight, so he told her to disappear. Having already sat down at the table, the blonde put a bag of crystals on it, allowing the buyer to examine them, which he did. When he finished, he asked which account to transfer the money to which the girl answered him, and the old man took off his hat, pressed it to his chest, bent down a little, and began to say goodbye, saying how nice it was to deal with them, also not forgetting about Henma, and then left them. The girl thought it was strange because he had never said goodbye before, which made the guy nervous, thinking that he could guess that he was the miner of all these crystals. But the blonde distracted him from his thoughts by starting to make fun of the guy, that allegedly he thought that the old man would pull out a knife and start threatening to give them the goods, because of which the guy was embarrassed, frowning. And the girl began to slap him on the back, reassuring him that she admits that everything could have gone the way he imagined and it happens, and then she took out her phone and handed it to the guy in the face, in which it was written that there was $1 million in the account. Let's go back to the old man, who did not seem suspicious to Henma for nothing. Sitting in the car, he was asked about the transaction, to which he replied that everything went well like all the others for today. If you count the total volume of samples for today, you will get quite a lot. The unknown liked this news, and taking one out of the bag, he turned to Park Wai-so with the question, what does he think about him? The purity of the sample is similar to those that can be obtained only in 5-star dungeons, which means that the hunter who extracted it is very strong and he is alone, the old man replied. The questioner thought about it, thinking that it would not be easy to find him, because he might be from some foreign clan, but then why would they come to Korea? And then he asked who sold him this crystal. Park Wai replied that it was a girl, but this time she came with her alleged business partner, and he should gather more information about it. The man in the white suit began to reflect that whoever got this crystal was able to overcome very difficult trials, and then thanked the old man for his work. And putting the crystal back into the bag, he continued, already asking Park Wai-so about what kind of power a person who could get such a product alone should have. To this he replied that only the captain is capable of such a thing, forcing him to laugh and request to collect all the information he can on the student Yu Min and her business partner. The old man could only agree, because the person he was talking to just now was Captain Lee Ji-tae himself. A couple of days later, Hen began to train hard, improving his fitness by doing pull-ups. Having done 150 this time, he finally jumped off the horizontal bar, and the table told him that he had broken his record in strength training. But he was not happy, because if he had been at home and not in hell, he would have easily done another 1,000, and here everything is given with such great effort. Lying on the ground, he was exhausted and dripping with sweat. He began to think how long he was already here, but then he was warned that there were 18 hours, 14 minutes and 58 seconds left before the next task. And so a couple of outings later, he finally began to realize that how much time he spends here, the same amount passes in real life. And this means that if he subtracts the current indicator from the initial value of the time before the task, he will get the time spent here. So he began to count on his fingers. The only thing the guy still can't understand is why he teleports from here to unpredictable places every time he started trying to portray it on the ground by drawing with a stick. Henma was a little annoyed because everything else is somehow understandable to him, but not this, and he began to let this anger out, shouting how he got sick of it. Why can't he teleport to a normal place? And cursing, he sat down on the ground, burying himself in large boulders, still not understanding. Over time, he calmed down and remembered about the skill he received from the chest earlier. This skill of help in battle remembers the user's techniques and helps to perform them with greater accuracy, as well as helps to predict the strategy and techniques of the enemy. After learning about this, the dark-haired man, bandaging his palms with bandages, began to think that in this game such a skill could be qualified as a cheat or hacking. The fact that he received such a skill from the system itself only means that without him at this level it is simply impossible to survive. Resolutely standing next to the pair, he was already ready to swing and hit it, but first he activated the skill of help in battle and then hit the pair with all his might. So the next blow flew by and several more subsequent ones at once. The only thing that pleased the guy was that each time he hit more and more accurately. The last blow already tore the pair into pieces that flew in all directions. The dark-haired man himself was blown away by his capabilities, and then realized what exactly the skill of help in battle means. His delight was interrupted by the notification of a new companion task for a beginner, the essence of which is to kill entry-level scarecrows. The guy was a little angry that he was called a beginner and began to resent why he was not given it at the first level and was given when he was already on the 7th. But then he began to think about the task, remembering that he had not yet met any scarecrows. But he needed to raise the level, so he was going to go on a search. Throwing on a white jacket and buttoning the Olympic mask on top, he set off on his way. Going into some alley from which a strong wind was blowing, the guy found a staircase leading down and decided to go down. At the bottom were the very entry-level scarecrows that he needed, so he began to consider them, thinking that it could not be that they were entry-level opponents, and they even seemed quite scary to him. Approaching one of them, Hen will only now notice that their level is not specified, even if it is written that the initial one. And I began hoping that they would not suddenly come to life to imagine that already goosebumps ran through my body. Picking up Dosteka, not knowing what they are capable of, he hid behind her, pulling out a hellish dart. Pointing it at one of the scarecrows, he threw it straight into the neck of the target, and then crouched down and hid completely. But there was no point in this. The scarecrow did not even shy away, and the guy decided that they did not work and he would deal with them quickly. So he swung his fist with all his might at the nearest scarecrow, but it did not look like he broke something, just moved it a little. When suddenly the iron scarecrows came to life, which alerted the guy, their eyes lit up red and they announced the beginning of the first level battle. They had just set themselves a level equal to the guy's level, that is, the 7th, and confidently rushed into the attack. Hen was able to dodge the first blow. He was lucky that at least they were not as fast as goblins, so he also succeeded from everyone else. In real life, the 7th level is equal to 5 years of service in the army or working as a bodyguard, but in hell, the 7th level is like a beginner. Slipping a little back, the guy decided to go on the attack himself, activating the skill of help in battle, confidently headed for the scarecrow. When they surrounded him and were ready to attack, he himself was already ready for a retaliatory blow from his side, so when one of the pieces of iron was about to hit him with his fist, the dark-haired man beat him by hitting the scarecrow right in the stomach. But the second one had already attacked him from behind, pinching his neck, starting to strangle and preparing to beat, but the guy did not give up and hit the opponent with his elbow, throwing him away from himself, and then the blow fell on the head of the scarecrow, leaving cracks. Pieces of the scarecrow's armor flew off from the place of injury, which meant the beginning of the second-level battle. All the scarecrows began to move faster, coming from behind, grabbing him by the hair, wrists, arms, legs, not letting him move, while the damaged scarecrow was running straight towards the guy with a swing, giving the guy a punch in the face and then in the stomach. And so blow after blow all over the poor man's body, while the density of his body tissues and blood clotting increased due to the increased pain threshold. But this did not save him. When the dark-haired man was already bleeding all over, the scarecrows let him go, stepping aside. The stamina level dropped below 10%, which activated the perk of the strongest in hell, which gave regeneration, and the guy got a little bit. The broken one, sitting on his knees in front of the enemies, was already thinking of running, but he was stopped by the fact that he did not even break any of them and gradually began to get up, addressing them like buckets with nuts who had learned martial arts. He put his hand out to the side to try something. The hand lit up with lightning and a wooden club appeared from it, which he resolutely directed at the target. This reinforced infernal club will not last long, but it has a great killing power, which is quite good in this situation. With a running start, the dark-haired man quickly ran towards the enemies, shouting, preparing to strike the first target he hit. One of them was standing in an attacking position ready to strike, but the guy beat her by hitting her hand, thereby breaking it, forcing her to fall off and fall on the tile. The place of damage sparkled and the scarecrow looked at it, updating data on its target. A blade appeared from the robot's second hand, which scared the guy very much, since the others also had weapons and all had different ones, which were then all directed at the intimidated Henna, who was subsequently killed. This time he managed to live for 5 days, 8 hours, 4 minutes and 16 seconds, which is already quite a lot for such a place, especially with a low level. Having been reborn, they immediately went on the attack, but he managed to dodge to the side and then struck at the Scarecrow himself. After he knew that he was acting dishonestly, but he tied the Scarecrows to a post with a rope, realizing that with the help of help in battle one by one if he was able to kill these Scarecrows. And he began to quickly strike at one of them, breaking his armor and finding a weak spot to hit. Already about to hit him, he was stopped by a statement about the beginning of the battle of the third level, which forced him to laugh because he believed in his strength. He decided that the stronger he was, the stronger he became. But without finishing that Scarecrow, it managed to kill him earlier. The third level turned out to be much more difficult than the previous ones, so they started killing him several times, over and over again. Either by grabbing his neck from behind, then by a simple kick to the face, or by throwing over himself, even by kicking his foot to the side like a ball, or by an ordinary slap in the face that stopped his neck. It was as if he got into a hand-to-hand tournament. How many martial arts are there in their database? Leaning against a post, the guy sat and thought, but there wasn't much time for that. The Scarecrow started coming up to him again to finish him off, but the guy didn't give up. He didn't think he would die in a normal fist fight and decided to go on the attack. Pushing off, he pounced on the enemy who was able to evade the first blow, but the dark-haired man did not lose his head and turned around and struck a second blow with his foot, which the target successfully blocked and again updated the data, starting the fourth level battle. While Henmu was stunned, the Scarecrow did not hesitate and sent 2 fingers straight into the guy's eyes, hitting the target. The guy falls and starts screaming at the top of his head, covering his eyes with his hands and kicking his legs in pain. At this time the piece of iron opens its mouth and sharply bites the poor guy who has not yet moved away from his eyes by the leg. This forced him to open his eyes and look, but not to stop screaming, but forcing him to even scream louder, and the Scarecrow still wouldn't let go of him and eventually killed him. Again. For the 9th time, Henmu realized something, and first of all, that the 4th level of combat is the limit for Scarecrows and that the variations of techniques are over, so after getting used to it, he can already fight back and dodge. And secondly, it is that the Scarecrows have a script of movements and techniques beyond which they cannot go out, and if you interrupt the script halfway, the Scarecrow begins to slow down, as the new script is being adapted to the situation. Having put all the Scarecrows together at one point, Henmu intended to deliver the last glittering blow, since in the third he realized that it was not necessary to destroy the Scarecrows, because after receiving a certain percentage of damage, they themselves turn off, and therefore there is no need to break them to the end. And realizing all this, he swung his leg and hit them all at the same time, throwing them back and hitting each one in turn, destroying each of the Scarecrows. Thus he managed to win and the task was completed. Standing in a victorious pose, he finally shouted out with joy that he had succeeded and, after looking at his former enemies, exhaled with relief after everything. From fatigue, the guy could no longer stand, and because of this he fell on the tile without strength and began to curse the Scarecrows, because Henmu wanted an opponent of his level, and it was a fight at the master level. Rising up, he began to reason about how exhausting and long the fight was, that he managed to memorize all their martial arts scripts by heart, and decided that it was better for him to just look at the award he received and return home. The SSS level luck perk increased the value of his reward, which is why a heavenly cradle card appeared in his hand, which then turned into a yellow handkerchief, which made the guy confused. But the table explained that he received the legendary item Heavenly Cradle, which has the effects of stimulating growth processes, as well as healing wounds and mechanical damage. The dark-haired man did not understand how this is stimulation of growth processes, since everything is clear with healing, but not very much at the expense of growth, and began to consider the received object straightening it. Of course, he was glad that he received the legendary item, but he had no idea how to use it, which was not very pleasant at the same time. And he came up with the idea that suddenly he would become smarter if he tied it on his head and taking hold of the 2 ends of the fabric, he wrapped them around his head, connecting them on his forehead until he realized what kind of bullshit he was doing. Throwing the handkerchief away, he was even glad that no one sees him here, because what a shame it would be. Then, squeezing it in his hand, he began to think what the hell he needed at all, because when he dies and is born, He is always fresh as a cucumber and 100% health, and decided that he did not need this rag. He was already going to sell it, since the legendary item would certainly give a decent amount, but when he opened the inventory, he found an egg that he had previously created from a mountain of mosquitoes. Deciding that what was written in the description of the handkerchief about growth would help him so that the egg hatched, he preferred to leave the rag for now. Covering the egg with a handkerchief, he began to expect that something would happen, but after sitting there for a few minutes nothing changed, and the guy decided that the handkerchief was still useless even for the egg and was going to take off the handkerchief, was already thinking of selling it. Until the fabric abruptly lit up, crumbling into pieces similar to a shell, which struck the dark-haired man, and in the place where the fabric moved away, an egg could be seen that began to crack. But the guy didn't think before that maybe a bloodthirsty monster would hatch out of him now. He didn't even know if he could cope with it. That scared he even began to imagine it. The egg glowed so brightly that he had to cover himself with his hands so as not to go blind and pull away a little. Abruptly, the egg opened completely and there was a little sleeping white-haired girl in it, which made the guy embarrassed. And the girl slowly opened her red eyes and quietly got up, trying to wake up to the end. Taking her wand and opening her wings, she simultaneously stretched and approached the guy, who began to grin, because she turned out to be smaller than he expected, and pulled his finger towards her. The fairy stopped after looking at him, and then clasping her hands bit him with her fangs. Henma got scared and started yelling that it really turned out to be a bloodthirsty monster, and instantly automatically removed his hand from her, swearing at the system. At that time, the fairy fell to the ground due to severe hunger, saying how he wants to eat, and the dark-haired one paid attention to this while she sat down and continued to ask for food pitifully. The guy sitting in front of her exhaled in despair and handed the candy to her, thereby offering it to her, and the white-haired woman grimaced and shook her head negatively. Henma decided to ask her what she wanted then, to which she pointed her finger directly at the guy, and the guy followed by pointing at himself, so coped with himself or something. The fairy only silently smiled as a sign that the guy was right when he already accepted that he really got a bloodthirsty monster, and gave her his hand. Inserting her wand into the guy's hand, the white-haired woman began to suck his blood through him. It was not the most pleasant feeling, so the dark-haired man decided that it would be enough for her or he would suck everything, decided to push her away, and she stopped the guy's finger and began to speak indignantly, saying that he would not interfere and that she would stop the blood now, and that was it. Pulling out the wand, she began to lick the bleeding site, which seemed disgusting to him. Although on the other hand, what did he expect from an egg extracted from a mountain of mosquitoes? When she finished, the fairy took off and told him about it while he was thinking about her as a mosquito fairy, because she even has a voice like a mosquito, and that after her his hand began to itch. And then, imagining herself in charge here, she demanded to serve her dessert, addressing Henma as a slave, which began to anger the guy, so he grabbed her with his hand and began to squeeze, indignant at the way she called him. But she did not stop showing off, saying that everything was delicious and he was a good servant. Because of what, the guy's grip became even stronger, on the contrary that it even hurt her, and this time she already turned to him as a butler, saying that he had very good blood. And Henmu, resigned that she was not fixable, let the poor girl go, asking her name and at the same time calling her own, and the fairy, pouting her lips, still a little angry at the guy, was going to answer, but did not name her, because she forgot and it scared her very much. And the dark-haired man just exhaled, deciding that then she would be a mosquito fairy, and obviously she didn't really like this idea once she started puffing on him, until suddenly she remembered what made her glow with joy. According to her, she is a post-apocalyptic fairy. The guy thought that this meant that she was born to save the world after the end of the world. But no, it's not like that at all, because she swore that she would devour every single living organism that would still be alive. But everything is actually not as colorfully good as she says, smiling. While she was glowing with the joy of these memories, the guy stood in horror, thinking that he would have to kill her as soon as possible before it was too late, although the fact that this little thing was going to devour all life on the planet puzzled the dark-haired man a little. His blood is very poisonous, and she drank it calmly, but even when the dart with her got into the goblin's hand, she immediately blistered and nothing happened to her. While she was grinning, the guy was sitting in thought and poking at her began to tickle, at least it seemed so to her since it was tickling. Henma can't even summon the effective help in battle now because she is not hostile at the moment, and he has no idea what her combat skills and level are, and most importantly it doesn't look like he can get rid of her. Then you can make friends and make her your companion, so the guy thought. But the fairy had too much opinion of herself and pestered the tortured guy again with what she wanted to eat. The guy humbled himself and said that let it be so, since she was going to devour the whole world there, he would not care what she was sanctified about by agreeing. But he also thought not to call her by you or whatever she called herself, so he came up with a name for her like Ranian, which the fairy really liked, and she began to praise him, saying what a wonderful name her butler had come up with for her. Henmu told her that it was good that she liked the name at least, but everything turned out to be not so nice, because in the language of fairies this name looks like the phrase of the messenger of the apocalypse, which caused the guy to stand in a stupor while the fairy happily twitched her wings. After that, the dark-haired man decided to translate the topic and put a condition on her that if she was going to be his companion, she would have to promise the guy one thing. The fairy was surprised that there was only one, but decided to listen, and it turned out that the condition was not to eat people, which she did not really like. She asked him if it was possible to eat it, to which he refused, because he doesn't care about others, just the main thing is that she doesn't touch him. And even if she is very, very hungry and dying, the guy pointing at her with his finger said that she would find someone else, but just not him, to which the fairy was confused until the guy added that in return she would receive blood from him. The white-haired woman was delighted and agreed, because according to her, they fairies are gourmets, at the expense of which the guy thought that even though they are gourmets, they should eat less. This dialogue would have continued even more, but the little one noticed the scarecrows and began to be interested in them, immediately realizing that they were not people, to which the guy put his hands on his belt a little and majestically replied that these were victims of his magnificent fighting skills. But his triumph did not last long, as he noticed the scarecrow torn into two, although he did not remember tearing any of them apart like that. He remembered the blow when he forced with all his might on all the scarecrows at once, but it could not be that then he could break the ass, he would not have had enough strength, at least he thought so. But a table appeared that said that the skill of the help in battle received an upgrade of heroic strength, and the guy thought that maybe this upgrade works only within the framework of the use of the skill? And better than guessing, he decided to check because practice is always the best test. Taking one of the less broken scarecrows and putting it right in front of him, he stood in a fighting pose and swung his fist towards the enemy, striking with all his might. Thereby he managed to tear off one of his hands, the mechanisms of which scattered in different directions like the hand itself. The fairy who appeared from behind the dark-haired man began to admire him how he could do it just bang and there is no hand, and that she also wants to try the same way, and while the guy himself was amazed at his strength, she flew up to the head of the same scarecrow and repeating her butler hit her hand right on it. The head of the scarecrow broke into small pieces, which struck Henma, but the familiar words that the enemy was identified were heard sharply and all the iron scarecrows began to rise on him. The guy immediately began to fight, getting up in a ready-to-attack pose, waiting for an attack, and the scarecrows began to approach surrounding the dark-haired man, but not to attack. He was identified as a Superman, and the attack mode turned off. The guy did not understand what had happened and what they were talking about at all, until one of the pieces of iron pointed to a mountain of broken furniture that Henma had not noticed before when he came in. When the guy realized what was required of him, he began to disassemble the furniture, putting them in another place and disassembling most of the fairy felt some delicious-smelling smell and flew to him, directing his butler there, pointing his finger at the right place from where the smell came. The guy gradually began to make his way through the furniture, pushing aside the one that stands in his way to the indicated place, following the baby. In the place from which the smell emanated, there was a table at which the skeleton of a man sat on a chair, to which the fairy was beckoning. Flying up to him, the fairy immediately began to say what a yummy thing it was in her opinion, and breaking off her finger began to gnaw it while the guy stood in shock and watched it. But he got tired of it and grabbed her again, started swearing that you can't eat people and even the dead too, but she started squeaking that he took away from her not yummy. Apparently intending to give her that piece, the dark-haired man noticed a letter under that hand and took it out and began to read. The beginning was very gloomy. It was written in it that the person who wrote it made a lot of mistakes and for 3 years the level of complexity has increased to a nightmare, and their life has been getting worse since then. After all, as soon as they were born and breathed the poisonous air of our world, children immediately died, because of which all families were terrified. The owner of superpowers also cannot stand this life, and one after another died, and as it was said in the news, some committed suicide. Hope is fading every day, and humanity will no longer survive. When he finished reading the letter, Henma thought it was true or not. But if you remember the first letter from the system, and when he first got to Hell, that he entered the location of Hell being a user of a record low level, then this explains a lot. In fact, the Hell in which he is now is the future of the Earth, and it turns out that the highest caste of superpowers will also die out. Now, scratching the back of his head, the guy began to think whose letter it was, while the little fairy at the same time continued to gnaw the bones until she came across a mysterious thing for her that she showed the guy before eating it, with the question whether she could eat it. Henmu did not answer the question, but only said that it was a stone of return, and, taking out and looking at his own, decided that he looked like the one he had with everyone. The fairy held this stone in her little hands and said that it belonged to this skeleton, after which the guy asked to give it to him, to which the little one agreed and pulled it into his hands, but when he touched it, the stone lit up, which threw the fairy away. The glow made the guy nervous because he didn't understand what was going on, and he couldn't take his hand away from him until the stone abruptly began to crack, and as a result we broke into small pieces, and strangely the guy's hand hurt after that. When the stone completely disappeared, the guy brought his trembling hand to himself and looked at it, and found some kind of sign on it, after which a table appeared that said that the stars were watching him. And then, abruptly, some kind of black hole appeared from the ceiling, which scared the guy and the fairy, too, so she, as if nothing had happened, just started to fall out of there, leaving the dark-haired one and finally saying that she believes in him. He only shouted at her to come back, but there was no need for it. She had already flown away for a long time, and the unknown darkness began to suck the guy until he completely turned out to be in an unknown place similar to space. He was confused and did not understand where he was, so he began to shout and call Ranian, gradually moving forward until a table appeared in which it was said that the advancing star Beryl knew that he had absorbed the star fragment. And suddenly some crystal flew in from somewhere that scared the guy because he didn't understand what it was. But the table said that this Beryl was enchanted by his reaction, and then he flew away, refusing his fragment of a star. The guy was so angry that he was ready to tear even metal because he didn't understand who he was to be disappointed in him, and showed him the middle finger after him. Out of anger, he began to knock on the table, saying that he had never heard of any such stars and asked to explain why the information was unblocked. It said that the lords of the stars are cosmic beings who rule each their own kingdom, and these beings put particles of their power into star fragments, and send them throughout the universe so that these fragments find worthy agents who can serve the lords of the stars and help them expand their possessions. Henmu didn't understand why people like them would be interested in him, but the table kept telling him about his own, or rather that the user, that is, Henmu himself, found a star fragment, and this means that the lords of the stars want him to become one of them. The guy at first did not understand what a star fragment was until he remembered about the stone that Ranian found and realized that it was not a stone of return but a star fragment. His thoughts were interrupted by some sound that he noticed by looking up somewhere, and from there flew several similar to the last crystal Beryl other crystals that differed only in color. They all started circling around the uncomprehending Henma. The first was the Whispering Star Monstrel, who wants to develop his talent for charm with which he can captivate and mislead everyone around, and the next was the Conqueror Star Arden, who promised to teach him the command of an army of steel and fire. There was also a hungry Star Egeline who invited him to go with him in search of the serpent that swallowed this planet. The Star of Destruction Tal offered him a whole world that can be controlled by someone else's hands, and the Star of Tears Verde promises that one day he will become the ruler of the world of the dead. The dark-haired man was spinning around looking at each one. I don't understand what they are talking about at all, and the table explained that these creatures see potential in him, and want to invest in his development. I don't wait for him to demonstrate his abilities to them. The guy started asking questions about how to invest in his development, but they only told him to just choose a star. But he didn't know how to choose a star because he needed details because he didn't understand anything. Therefore, let's start in order. To begin with, The Star of Destruction Tall is a gray cardinal enjoying strategies and conspiracies that he controls the masses while remaining unknown. His entourage is a dagger and poison in the wrong hands. He is the mastermind of any conspiracy. His adherents are secret organizations ruling the world. The next star is the Star of Tears of Verde. He is the father of grief and sorrow, also the lord of the army of the dead. His element is human despair and grief, the loss of unfulfilled hope and hopeless struggle. The hungry star Egalim is an insatiable greed embodied in the form of a snake, and hunger always reigns in his kingdom, and he wants to devour the whole universe. The next whispering star of the Monstrel is her element of inciting passion in the light of day and treachery under the cover of night, because she shines brightest next to the one who radiates light himself, and even the most powerful creature falls at her feet if she wants to. The Conqueror Ardent Star is a star of thoughtlessness and impotent malice, because he burns everything with fire and cuts out all enemies to one. In his senseless anger he wants the world to blaze with fire, and he doesn't care if he only rules the scorched earth. After the story, the guy thought that they seemed to have a personality disorder and the psychiatric hospital was crying for them, and the table answered him that the stars were drawn to those who were like them, thereby hinting at Henma himself, which means he is an intriguer, a womanizer, a sadist and has insatiable greed and also a maniac capable of genocide? He shouted that he could admit that he was not a good person because no matter how you look at him, it was as if there was nothing good in him, but not so much. The stars swirled around him, not understanding what he was thinking about there, when he admitted that he was not so good, but he didn't seem to be so bad, because he didn't seem to have done anything shameful, although he might have done it, but he just doesn't remember his bad deeds. In any case, he's not as crazy as these stars by his opinion. And he decided to ask the stars themselves a question about what would happen when he made a choice, and one of the stars flew up to him, revealing himself, thereby giving a look at what the future awaits him. The battle with monsters, politics, military, police, and much more they offered him. He did not believe that they would be able to give it all to him because he had been through so much, and they were clearly not telling something. There was some kind of catch. So he asked what was required of him in return, and all he was told was to serve the chosen star and nothing else. The stars patronize and help their ward grow up, and then asked through him, these are all conditions. He was wondering if it was necessary to make a choice right now because he himself was not yet sure what exactly he wanted. But the opportunity to choose a star is a very rare and important event, and when the stars are convinced that you are able to overcome any obstacles, they will lift you to incredible heights of power. According to these words, the guy realized, folding his arms on his chest, that right now they could not actually offer him anything, but only in the future, to which the stars were outraged by his arrogance. The guy took it like they were kind of telling him to watch his tongue.